They thought I sold the family's gold coin. My mother threw me out of New Orleans for shaming the family. But when I came back to Charleston 10 years later, my forgiveness wasn't a gift. It was a transaction. My name is Callum Reed. I was 17 that summer when the heat in New Orleans was so thick you could almost chew it. We lived in the lower 9th Ward, and the only thing more beaten down than the asphalt was our family's hope. Katrina had swept through years before, but the recovery never reached us. It had only widened the gap between people like us and people like my Aunt Vivienne. She lived in the pristine Garden District. Her house a monument to everything we'd lost and everything we'd never have. The whole mess started when my father, Walter, had to take out a loan for his shrimping boat. It was the only way he could keep food on our table after the storm destroyed his dock. The repayments were crushing us, and my mother, Martha, felt the shame of it like a brand. That's why we were at Vivienne's, sitting in her chandelier-lit dining room, pretending the imported china made the debt feel lighter. Vivienne, with her sharp jewels and sharper tongue, looked down on us like we were a charity case, not family. She was all fake concern stitched into an expensive silk dress. Then she brought up the coin, the Reed family heirloom, a rare 1899 double eagle gold piece, passed down generations, the only thing of material value left from my father's side of the family. Vivienne had custody of it, keeping it locked in a wall safe she bragged about constantly. She waited until dessert to drop the bomb. "Someone," she said, tapping her sterling silver fork on the plate, "has been into my safe." The coin was gone. The air went cold. The coin wasn't just money. It was the symbol of the Reed legacy, the last vestige of our honor. Vivienne didn't look at my father, the actual Reed heir. She didn't look at my mother, her sister-in-law. She looked straight at me. Callum, the quiet kid from the poor part of town. The lock was picked by someone who knew the mechanism. She said, her voice slow and heavy, "The only person who showed that much interest in the safe was you." Callum. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I didn't flinch. I hadn't touched the safe, hadn't even been in that room. "I didn't take your coin, Aunt Vivienne," I stated, my voice steady. My younger brother, Elijah, who was only 16, went white. He was looking at the floor, his hands gripping the edge of his seat. I saw a quick flicker of his eyes toward the hallway. A blink so fast, only a big brother watching for trouble would catch it. It was like he was checking to see if the coin or the problem was still out there. Ruby, my little sister, started stammering, trying to change the subject. But it was too late. Vivienne was set. "That coin is worth more than your father's boat. Callum, tell me where it is." That's when my mother, Martha, grabbed my arm. Her grip was hard, fueled by years of worry and financial stress. "Callum, look at me. Tell us the truth." I met her eyes, which were pleading and accusing all at once. I didn't take it." But she didn't believe me. She was looking for a quick fix, a reason for the shame. "You've ruined us," she whispered, her voice a sharp blade. I froze. That cut deeper than anything Vivienne could say. Back home that night, packing my backpack, I found something stuffed deep inside Elijah's old fishing vest, tucked behind a coil of rope. It was a receipt, a pawn shop ticket for a rare gold item, dated 2 days before. I stood there, holding it like it was radioactive proof of a lie I hadn't told. Elijah walked in, saw the ticket in my hand, and his face was the color of driftwood. He didn't cry, didn't argue. He just said one word. "Low and final, don't." That was enough, I understood. He hadn't taken the coin for himself. He must have taken it for Dad's boat, trying to be the hero, trying to fix a broken situation. When my mother asked me one last time, her eyes tired and full of regret, I still told her no, that I hadn't taken it. She didn't press for details. She just told me I needed to leave. "Get out until you can act like a son," she said. My father, Walter, didn't say a word. He just sat at the kitchen table, his jaw clenched, staring out the window with the dead eyes of a man who'd already lost everything, including his will to fight for his son. I took my backpack, wrote a quick note for Ruby saying I was fine, and walked out before the sun rose over the bayou. I didn't say goodbye to Elijah. I was the big brother, and taking the fall was the only thing I felt I had left to give them. I took the hit and kept walking. The Greyhound bus heater died somewhere in Alabama, and by the time I stepped off onto the wet sidewalk of Charleston, South Carolina, I was running on cold air and $47. The morning smelled like salt marsh and distant exhaust. It was just after 4 o'clock, and the air was crisp, unlike the humid suffocation of New Orleans. I was 17, practically homeless, and carrying the shame of a thief that wasn't mine to claim. But the silence I carried was heavier than the pack on my back. I walked the streets, looking for the kind of place that opened before the sun was up, the kind of place that hired without asking for a past. I found it in the historic district, tucked down a less-traveled alley near the docks, a boat repair and dry dock shop, its sign faded and hand-painted, reading Hollis Marine Services. A dim yellow light glowed from the main hangar door. There was a sound inside the rasp of sandpaper and the low murmur of an old radio. Without thinking twice, I pulled the door open. The air inside was thick with the honest sense of sawdust, epoxy, and salt. An older man, his face weathered like old oak and his hands dusted with wood shavings, looked up from where he was sanding the hull of a small vessel. His apron was stained with various varnishes and paint. He paused, narrowed his eyes, and said, "Lost, kid, or just looking to warm up?" "Neither," I said. "I'm looking for work. I can lift, I can clean, and I can follow instructions." A woman with silver hair and a sharp gaze walked out from the back office, holding a clipboard. She looked at me, then at the old man. "Hollis, give the kid a sanding block," she instructed. Then she turned to me. "You sweep up the sawdust. Then you patch the scuff on that hull. We start the real work in an hour." That was the interview. They didn't ask my name, didn't ask where I came from, and certainly didn't ask what I'd done. I think they could see it in my eyes, the kind of tired that comes from carrying someone else's burden. I told them my name was Callum, that I wasn't there to steal anything, and I wasn't there to cause any drama. The old man Hollis, just grunted and pointed toward a pile of debris. "Start there, son. The floor's a disgrace." By 6 o'clock, my hands were raw, but the concrete floor gleamed under the strip lights. The silver-haired woman, who I learned was Mrs. Hollis, brought me a mug of black coffee and a dense, sweet biscuit. Hollis nodded, a single, approving gesture that felt more meaningful than any long speech. They didn't offer to pay me in cash or give me a lecture. What they gave me was better, a small, dusty storage room above the office. It had a cot, a tiny bathroom with a leaky faucet, and a view of the rusted shipyard. Rent $50 a week came straight out of my meager paycheck. "No lease, no questions, Mrs. Hollis said. "Just don't bring trouble up there, and don't touch the tools unless told." Work started before dawn. I learned fast how to sand against the grain, how to mix resin without bubbling, and how to smile at the demanding clients without trying too hard. I learned the quiet rhythm of the shipyard, the gentle slap of waves against the pylons, the screech of gulls, the low-frequency hum of the city waking up. That silence was my shield. Every hour I kept my hands busy was an hour I didn't have to think about the dining room in New Orleans, my father's dead eyes, or the whispered "don't" from my brother. After 2 weeks, I walked down to the post office and bought a P.O. box. I mailed my sister, June, a short note. No return address, just the box number and 3 lines. "I'm okay. Please don't write back. I just need you to have this." I didn't trust that my mother or father wouldn't intercept a letter, and I certainly didn't want Elijah to feel like I was watching him. I just needed my sister to know I was still tethered, somewhere. The first 3 months were a blur of sawdust, fiberglass dust, and the deep, silent focus of manual labor. I didn't just sweep up. I learned the anatomy of the boats we serviced. Hollis Marine wasn't fancy. We didn't deal with the sleek, new fiberglass speedboats. We specialized in restoring classic wooden hulls and maintaining the working vessels that actually paid the bills along the Charleston docks. I preferred it that way. Old man Hollis and Mrs. Hollis taught me things the right way, not the fast way. Hollis was a man of few words, but every word he did speak carried the weight of decades spent on the water. I'd watch him shape mahogany with a hand plane, and his movements were as gentle and precise as a surgeon's. Once, when I was sanding a rough patch of hull too aggressively, he walked over, took the block from my hand, and showed me the right pressure. "Lighter hands. Callum," he said, his voice raspy. "You're not fighting it. You're coaxing the wood back to life. If you treat it rough, it dies on you, like anything alive." That lesson stuck with me. It wasn't just about woodworking. It was about life. I realized I'd been treating my own life with rough hands, fighting the circumstances that had forced me out. Now, I learned to coax, to apply pressure where needed, but mostly to listen to the grain. Mrs. Hollis, who managed the books, taught me about inventory, invoicing, and the meticulous art of keeping a business afloat. She'd watch me count the brass fittings or check the varnish stock and call me our little accountant. By the end of the fall, I could prep a hull for painting, mix the anti-fouling correctly, and even manage the winch without Hollis having to stand over me. I wasn't just an employee. I was becoming a part of the shop's quiet rhythm. One morning, Hollis walked in and tossed a small ring with a brass key onto the counter next to my coffee mug. No note, no speech, just the key to the shop. I didn't ask why. I just slipped it onto my keychain. It felt heavy. It wasn't just a key to a building. It was a key to their trust. But I knew raw grit and a strong back weren't enough to survive in the long term, especially not the way I wanted to. I didn't want to stay small and perpetually scared. So, after closing up the shop and washing the day's epoxy from my hands, I started taking night classes at the local community college. Small business basics. The professor had a monotonous voice, but he drove home one point that resonated deep within me. You can't run what you don't understand. I started tracking everything. Tools, materials, labor hours, profit margins on basic repairs. It wasn't a formal ledger, just dates, tallies, and notes scribbled on the backs of old invoices. I realized how much money Hollis was losing simply by inefficient ordering and overstocking. I kept the notebook hidden beneath the cash register. I was building a plan, not just for their survival, but for mine. I hadn't stopped thinking about my family. Every month, I mailed June a plain, folded envelope with $25, cash only, no return address, just a short note, for supplies for Elijah's boat. I knew the boat had been sold, but I needed them to know someone out there still remembered what Elijah cared about. I never signed it. I didn't want the credit. I just needed to keep that single, fragile line of responsibility intact. My father's birthday passed, and I walked around all day with a card in my pocket, ready to mail. I never did. The words felt hollow. I tore it up behind the shop. Forgiveness felt impossible. But separation was simply a necessity. The turning point came when I saw the letter addressed to Old Man Hollis. His hands twitched at the edge of the paper, and his mouth tightened as he read the cold, hard demand for more money. His landlord was demanding an 18% lease hike. Old Man Hollis didn't curse. He just sighed, folded the letter twice, and slid it under the register with a defeated gesture. The paper, a standard notice with a pristine letterhead, demanded an 18% rent bump with no justification and no improvements promised. It was a cold, calculated demand for more from a man who was already losing ground. Later that night, when Hollis stepped out for a smoke, I pulled the envelope out. The letterhead stopped me cold. Vivian Estates Management. That name hit me like a physical blow. The same Aunt Vivian who had accused me of theft 10 months earlier was now, indirectly, my boss's landlord. I realized that the wealthy, powerful world I had run from had simply followed me. It felt like her influence was a shadow cast over every dock and storefront in the southeast. I didn't tell Hollis or Mrs. Hollis. I didn't say a damn word. I just circled the due date on the calendar in deep red marker. I started leaving subtle hints for the local clients. When they asked about the red circle, I'd shrug and say, "Could be something big, something worth noticing. Maybe where you get your boat fixed is about to change." Charleston's maritime community was close-knit. People paid attention when their trusted services were at risk. Word spread fast. Soon. A reporter from the Charleston Harbor Ledger was stopping by, asking Hollis what he thought about big city money trying to squeeze out a local legacy. Hollis, wiping his hands on his denim apron, just muttered, "We've been here longer than their spreadsheets." The article ran 2 days later, with a photo of Hollis mid-laugh, flour or maybe sawdust on his sleeve. That piece bought us time, flooding the shop with prepaid work and customer support. But I knew it wouldn't last. I was standing on Vivian's turf again, and this time, I wasn't going to retreat. Hollis's right wrist was starting to give him trouble, a dull, aching injury from decades of heavy work. He'd rub it quietly, trying to hide the pain. Then, one evening, Mrs. Hollis sat me down at the workbench after close. She poured strong, hot coffee and looked me in the eye. "We're tired, Callum," she said simply. "Not in a bad way, just ready. They told me their children were professionals in other states. No one wanted to take the shop. They didn't want to sell to a chain, but they needed to stop working. We're offering," Hollis said. Their offer was clear seller financing, a fair price, monthly payments, no banks, no pressure. Just one condition: the name Hollis Marine Services had to stay on the sign until I decided I had truly earned the right to change it. I was barely 18, with no credit history and only calloused hands. "I don't have the money," I said flatly. "We didn't ask that, Mrs." Hollis replied, her silver hair catching the low light. "I didn't say yes right away. The main problem was still the lease, Vivian Estates Management." I pulled the contract from Mrs. Hollis's locked drawer and read every line until the legal jargon blurred. Then I saw it one small clause buried near the end that mentioned unreasonable increases exceeding market comparables. That word, unreasonable, stuck in my gut. I started calling around, compiling data on commercial rents for similar spots along the harbor. I was going to fight Vivian on her own terms with math and law. Then, a polished man named Vance showed up, running a rival boat detail shop down the coast. He offered to partner, looking around the dusty shop with a wrinkled nose. "The rags to riches story is cute," he smirked. "But running a proper business takes more than grit. You know your way around a spreadsheet." I wiped my hands on my apron and met his gaze. "I know my way around 4 o'clock in the morning," I countered. Vance didn't smile kindly. He wanted to scale, systematize, and eventually, he wanted me out. I tossed his cards straight into the oily waste bin. My fight wasn't just with Vivian anymore. It was with everyone who assumed that a working man didn't belong in the owner's seat. I signed the papers with Hollis and Mrs. Hollis. It was a simple agreement, built on trust more than collateral. In the eyes of the bank and the city, I was now the owner of a working shipyard. The name Hollis Marine Services stayed above the door for now, a promise I intended to keep. The first major challenge was the rent hike. I presented my research to the Charleston Zoning and Maritime Board. I wore a clean shirt, combed my hair, and stood in front of the strangers with a stack of papers. "I am the owner of Hollis Marine Services," I stated. And I'd like to ask on record why Vivian Estates Management is demanding an 18% increase when comparable dock space rent has only risen by 5%. There has been no maintenance, no repairs, and no justification. Hollis stood directly behind me, saying nothing. His presence alone, the weight of a local legacy, made me stand taller. The boardroom went quiet. Someone from the audience, a grizzled old fisherman, said, "Good question." The moment was documented, forcing Vivian's company to back off temporarily. The lease stayed steady, but I didn't trust the peace to last. I knew this was just the first skirmish. My second step was the physical change. We closed the shop for 9 days straight. I had no contractor, just a list, my grit, and Hollis supervising with a taped wrist and a hot coffee. We repainted the hangar in deep navy and warm white, replacing the peeling yellow that made the place feel like a condemned warehouse. We swapped out the dim lighting for bright, focused LEDs. I scraped every rusted sticker off the tool cabinets with a razor and a prayer. Hollis finally gave a little nod of approval. On day 5, Mrs. Hollis brought lunch, insisting I eat with both hands so I didn't pass out from exhaustion. That's when the place finally felt like mine. I kept the old Hollis Marine Services script painted inside above the main workbench as a tribute. But the sign facing the harbor was new, the cypress anchor. Clean, matte black, bold lettering. It felt solid and honest. I focused the business on custom detailing and high-end yacht restoration, partnering with a local veteran-owned timber supplier in the Low Country who delivered specialized cypress wood every week. I added support local under every service quote. People liked that. They wanted to invest in the local economy. The Harbor Ledger ran a follow-up article, "Local Kid Steps Up Anchor of Grit." The photo showed Hollis handing me a wooden ruler like he was passing on a sword. I didn't care for the attention, but I clipped the article, stuck it in an envelope, and mailed it to the P2 box I shared with June. I didn't add a note. I just needed her to know I hadn't given up. We reopened on a Saturday. By noon, our scheduling board was full for the next 2 months. I walked out to the pier and apologized to the few people I couldn't schedule immediately. I promised them priority. They showed up the next week with travel mugs and thank you cards. Meanwhile, the old life was slowly calling me back. A letter came from June, explaining that Mom and Dad were picking up odd jobs, Walter repairing small engines, Martha working double shifts at a pharmacy. Elijah was quieter than usual, moody. June wrote, "Aunt Vivian has been asking about you. She wants to know if you've turned into something respectable." I folded the letter slowly. Vivian had a talent for poison disguised as curiosity. 2 weeks later, my phone rang, a number I hadn't seen in over a year, with the New Orleans area code. "Callum." Ruby's voice was shaky, like the phone line itself had rusted. I stood in the hangar, completely frozen, holding a measuring tape. "Yeah," I said, barely breathing. "Callum." Ruby's voice was shaky, like the phone line itself had rusted. "Yeah," I managed. She let out a shaky breath. "I've been holding off calling. I didn't know if I should." I leaned against the workbench. "It's okay. June, I'm glad you did." We talked for almost an hour. Not about the coin, or the night I left, or the silence that followed. Not yet. She told me about her new part-time job at the school, saving up to get her own apartment. I told her about the shop, the new cypress timber we were using, and how Old Man Hollis still came by every Tuesday to tell me my sanding wasn't up to scratch. When she mentioned Mom and Dad, her voice dropped. She said Mom, Martha, was tired lately, quieter, and full of regret. She still cries sometimes when no one is looking. June admitted, "I know it's about you." I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I said, "I regret stuff, too." There was a beat of silence that meant more than any long explanation. June hadn't mentioned Elijah. We danced around his name like it might bite, or like speaking it out loud would break the fragile peace we had just built. After June called, I bought 2 bus tickets and sent them in an envelope with her name on it, one for her, one for Elijah to the P.O. box. 2 days later, she wrote back, a torn scrap from a notepad. Her handwriting was tighter than I remembered. Send Elijah. Let them see him. They need to breathe. I did as she asked. Elijah arrived on a Thursday morning, stepping off the bus. He was taller, his jaw sharper, and his hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie. He looked like a statue of the frightened kid I'd left behind. I didn't say much, just nodded toward the cypress anchor. We ate cold pizza in the office, the grease-stained box between us. He picked off the olives. I watched him more than the food. Nice shop, he mumbled, eyes on the floor. Thanks, I replied, not pushing it. Later, I showed him the work floor, how to prep a fiberglass patch, how to choose the best timber. I wasn't teaching him the job. I was showing him what I had built. He stared at the gleaming wood of a restored dinghy like it meant something he couldn't verbalize. That night, he slept on the cot in my old room above the office. Around midnight, I was half asleep when I heard the floor creak. He stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette. I didn't say anything back then because I was scared, he whispered, then turned and closed the door. It wasn't the full truth, but it was a crack in the dam. A week later, the doorbell chimed at exactly 10:07 a.m. It was Aunt Vivienne, cream coat, fresh hair, and a manufactured smile. Callum, she cooed. Family should reconnect. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and leaned on the counter, the smell of turpentine covering the scent of my lingering anger. We open at 7. We close at 7, I said. You won't find family therapy on the menu. She ordered a black coffee she didn't touch and started rambling about perspective. Revisionist history doesn't go well with coffee. Aunt Vivienne, I retorted. She blinked, unused to hearing no, and left the coffee untouched. That night, June called. Mom had broken down when Elijah got home. Dad, Walter, was standing there, his hand on her shoulder, saying nothing but nodding. He's been listening more, June said. Not talking, just listening. That was new. I felt a small, reluctant thaw. Then I got a text from my parents asking to meet somewhere neutral. We picked a greasy diner off the highway, bright lights, sticky menus, a place with no memories. They showed up together. Dad looked older, but the hard, dead look in his eyes was softer now. He shook my hand hard, then pulled me into a quick, awkward hug. Mom, Martha, looked jumpy, her eyes bouncing around the room like she expected me to bolt. We talked about inconsequential things, Walter's small engine repair shop, June's job. Then Dad shifted in his seat. I should have pushed back that night at Vivienne's, he said, his voice quiet. I should have said something. I froze. I didn't interrupt. He gave a slow nod, like that one sentence had finally lifted a massive weight he'd been carrying. Dad, Walter, looked lighter after he confessed his silence. He gave a slow nod, like admitting his failure as a father was the first step toward building something real with me again. When we stood to leave the sticky diner booth, Mom, Martha, pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. She didn't say what it was, only held my hand longer than necessary. I waited until I was back in the truck to open it. It was an old church bulletin. Inside, she had written one simple line. Come home when you're ready. I drove back to Charleston with the window cracked, the quiet feeling different now, not hollow, but still, like an old ache that had finally gone quiet. It made me breathe easier. My business grew. The Cypress Anchor was thriving, built on quality and my reputation for waking up at 4 in the morning. I started setting aside cash every week. Small amounts folded tight, locked in a safe. I wasn't saving for survival anymore. I was saving for a plan. Growth wasn't the goal. Breathing room was. I established an LLC, separating my personal assets from my business, a move Mrs. Hollis had insisted on teaching me. Then I called a commercial broker. I asked for a list of properties that were over-leveraged, undermanaged, and in rough shape along the Charleston coastline. One name stopped me cold. The Marshview Marina Complex, a fancy cluster of docks and commercial units. The mortgage balance was steep, held by a regional bank I already did business with. The owner, Vivian Estates Management. It wasn't personal, it wasn't emotional, it was just math on paper. A perfect opportunity. The price was high, but not out of reach, especially since I knew the owner was desperate for a liquidity injection. I signed the purchase papers through my LLC. No fanfare, no flags, just a name no one recognized and a line in a file. I had just purchased a significant piece of my Aunt Vivian's investment portfolio. We didn't gut the Marshview complex. We fixed it. I patched the docks, stripped the warped timber, and sanded the communal benches until the stain finally took. I brought in a local sailing instructor who'd been priced out of his last place, giving him a lease that let him sleep at night. I brought in a small fishing cooperative next door, fair rent. Simple terms. The older fisherman cried when he signed the contract. The lease agreement for the main commercial building included a suite still leased to Vivian Estates Management, carried over with the sale. Through the closing process, I inherited that lease on standard terms. Aunt Vivian wasn't the landlord here anymore. She was my tenant, same as anyone else. When the quarterly rent renewal period rolled around, Vivian's office called the property management line, which was now run by my new manager, an older woman I had specifically hired for her steady composure. "I'm calling on behalf of Mrs. Vivian," her assistant said. "She's contesting a late fee on her office suite lease that carried over post-sale." My manager replied, calm as a mill pond. "We can place her on a standard payment plan if needed. We do that for everyone." Silence on the other end, then a clipped, "Fine." I didn't need to see Vivian's face to feel it. That slow, cold realization that the leash she'd once used to pull me the financial pressure and the implicit power was now firmly snapped at both ends. It wasn't revenge. It was gravity. A month later, she walked into the Cypress anchor carrying a box wrapped in linen. "Preserves," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Since when?" She didn't answer, just smiled a strained smile. We sat in the office. She folded her hands and said, "I think I may have misjudged things back then. I was misled by assumptions." "Sure," I said. "That sounds about right." She waited for the absolution, the easy way out. I didn't give it. Aunt Vivian waited for the absolution, the easy way out. I didn't give it. I told her what she'd done still had a price, but that I wasn't the one collecting anymore. "I forgive you, Aunt Vivian," I said, leaning back in my office chair. "But not for you. I do it because I need to live my life without you camped out in my head, controlling my future." She nodded slowly, the realization of her lost power hitting her like a physical force. Then I told her the real reason I'd asked her to come. "There's a marine trade school kitchen going into the Marshview Marina Complex," I announced. "It opens next spring. A scholarship attached for kids in New Orleans who want to learn a trade." Her lips parted, ready to interject. I cut her off gently. "It'll be named the Walter and Martha Reed Legacy Fund, not the Vivian Fund." She looked like someone had just turned off the air in the room. It took her a second, but she regained her composure. "I'd like to donate," she said, smoothing her coat. "All donor names must be printed the same size, no exceptions." I replied, "Fair enough." She conceded and left the preserves behind. Meanwhile, my own family was finally coming back together, after the dinner at the greasy diner. Walter and Martha were making slow, painful progress. Walter was honest about his shame. and Martha was honest about her regret. The atmosphere felt less brittle. One evening, I got a text from Elijah, Dad's old shop, after close, just us. I didn't ask why. I just drove back toward New Orleans. Walter's engine shop still smelled like oil, old radio, and the faint, specific scent of honest work. Elijah stood by the workbench, wiping his hands on a rag stained dark with grease. He looked older, hardened by the silence he had kept. He didn't say hello. He just set a small box wrapped tight in brown paper on the bench and rested his palm on top of it. "I've been carrying this for too long. Callum," he said, his voice flat. "You probably knew. You always knew." I leaned against the old red toolbox. "I found the pawn shop ticket in your fishing vest the night everything blew up." I confessed. "Right behind the rope. I figured it out. I just didn't say anything." He swallowed hard, looked down at the floor, and nodded once. "I took the coin," he whispered. "Not all of it. I had to sell it for quick cash. I was 16. I was stupid. I thought maybe I could use the money to fix Dad's boat, to stop Mom from crying." He needed to say it all. "There was this specific welding tool that Dad needed, the one that broke just after the hurricane," he continued, his voice cracking. "I wanted to hand it to him and say, 'Here, Dad, something just for you for once.' Then I panicked. Vivian started counting. You know the rest." He slid the box toward me. "I found the exact kind of memento the coin was based on last month," he said. "I sold a set of rims I didn't need just to get it." I picked up the box, peeled the paper back slow. Inside was a small silver anchor charm, beautifully detailed and gleaming, a perfect symbol of what he'd tried to save. My chest went hot, not from anger, not even relief, but the warmth of something tight inside me finally letting go. "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes welling up, "for being a coward, for letting you walk out and not stopping it, for letting Mom put it all on you, for letting Dad stay quiet. I did that." I set the silver anchor charm down on the workbench and reached out, putting my hand on Elijah's shoulder. His body was stiff, braced for a blow or a shouted rejection. "I loved you then, Elijah," I said. "I love you now. That's why I took it. That's what being the big brother meant to me." He was a kid then, trying to save a boat and his father's honor in the only misguided way he knew how. "You were a kid," I repeated softly. Elijah shook his head, tears finally tracking pathways through the grease on his face. "You were a kid, too, Callum." We stood there, just the two of us, in a room full of bolts, oil, and the quiet, comforting smell of Walter's old shop. The memories didn't feel sharp and cutting anymore. They felt fixed, like a boat hull freshly sealed against the water. "You don't owe me this anchor," I told him. "You don't owe me an apology. Just keep being the man you've been turning into." "That's enough." He wiped his face with the back of his wrist and let out a short, choked laugh. "You always talk like a guy who gets up before dawn." "Habits are hard to break," I smirked. Then I told him the truth that had been locked away in my chest for a decade. I told him I had kept the whole family together in my head for years by believing this moment would happen just us. No noise, no one watching, just truth. He nodded. "Steady now." "I'll tell Mom and Dad," he promised. "They should hear it from me. It's not yours to carry anymore." I slid the silver anchor charm back in its box and closed the lid. "I'm putting this on the shelf in my office," I said, "right where I can see it when the days get loud." "Deal," he said. We hugged like brothers who knew exactly what it had cost to earn that word, and what it was still worth. The weight was gone. The resentment had been traded for resolution. The bitterness had been exchanged for the heavy, undeniable truth that I was finally free. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the pain. It was about not letting someone else steer my ship. I was done handing over the wheel. The success of the Cyprus anchor was never truly about boat repair. It was about building something solid from a foundation of betrayal and shame. It was about proving that my worth wasn't tied to a missing gold coin, but to the hands that built a business. The old boat shop, now the bustling Marshview Marina complex, stands as a testament to that truth. It's a place where local trades thrive, a stark contrast to the greed that almost ruined it. The Walter and Martha Reed Legacy Fund has already sent dozens of kids from New Orleans and Charleston to marine trade schools. We didn't want to teach them to chase quick riches. We wanted to teach them to build things that last. It's important to remember that true wealth lies not in inherited coins or titles, but in the integrity of the work itself and the ability to choose your own legacy. Life will always throw its storms at you, but the way you repair the hull is what determines if you float or sink. The anchor is not just for holding steady, it's for securing the future you built with your own two hands. If your life has been defined by a hurt you carried for someone else, remember that the transaction of forgiveness is for you alone. Don't let someone else's mistake continue to cost you your peace. Would you have taken the fall to protect your little brother, knowing it would cost you years of pain? Drop your answer in the comments and let us know. And please, give this video a like and subscribe to the Family Storyteller for more true stories about resilience, redemption, and the American spirit.